When you think of the Shaolin Temple, images of a mystical monastery nestled deep in the mountains, where warrior monks push the limits of their spirit in pursuit of enlightenment, may come to mind. Or maybe you think of a Disneyland-type tourist attraction, where daily circus-like performances are held and tour guides blare into megaphones to crowds of people. What is certain is that it's considered a mecca for all martial artists throughout the world, the place where, according to legend, Kung Fu was created after an Indian traveller taught Buddhist monks special breathing exercises and movements that evolved into a fighting system which would spread throughout Asia. My name is Will, and I have lived in China for the past 12 years, practicing and researching Chinese martial arts. I'm visiting the town of Dengfeng and the surrounding villages to find out what exactly Shaolin Kung Fu is, how does it differ from the popular perception, and what really is its influence on Chinese martial arts. Joining me on this journey will be two close friends, Joel Ackerman, a longtime practitioner of Shaolin Shiniba and disciple of Hujeongshung, and Thomas Lepinskas, who runs and teaches at the Shaolin Temple, Lithuania, and is filming his own documentary on the subject. We will be basing ourselves at Joel's teacher, Hujeongshung's school. Hujeongshung is in a unique position in Dongfeng. Not only is he well connected to all the old masters, but he also runs a school large enough to preserve and popularize the old teachings. There are several hundred Chinese students here, some as young as 5 years old, as well as a small group of Westerners. The students here begin with the grueling basics of Shaolin Kung Fu, as well as physical conditioning, acrobatics, and sanda, which is Chinese kickboxing. Master Hu oversees all their training and personally handpicks the most talented ones to learn his art of Shiniba. Before we head off on our trip, we sat down with Master Hu to drink some tea while he gave us an overview.
少林拳呢，我觉得它是和中原文化和中国的这个历史是相关联的。首先说少林寺呢，它是一个1000多年的寺庙。然后呢，它是中国从古代这个历史演变、战争或是朝代的更换中间，这个把中国 这个佛教或者说是这个武术，在民间或者在历朝历代中间，把它吸收、冲出于少林，演变给它传学于少林和地方民间，以形成一个相互的共同成长的一个过程。少林寺它也不会说是去单纯的像社会上说去创造武术，它是吸纳社会武术，形成进化，形成一套以少林寺或者少林地区为特色的一个武术门派，一个武术流派。
所以说，少林拳这不是说少林寺是创造了少林拳，而是吸收了外面的不同的拳法，融合在一起，
然后传学于少林。就在少林寺这边，他们是把外面好的武术留在少林，然后经过演练，更好的也留下，也有更好的留到社会上。所以说后来就形成了一个天下武功出少林，或者少林功夫传天下。这是客观来讲也是对的。他是因为有些武术在民间或者在某一个家或者在某一个地方可能没有了，但是少林寺这边还在延续着，所以说它起到一个历史的一个传承，这个作用是非常难得可贵的。
那作为一个佛教的寺庙，为什么要练拳？为什么练他们的拳那么出名？
这个可能和因为少林寺地处中原，也处于河南的中心，它是一个中国在以前的文化中间是一个核心地带。也与少林武术，你比如说它是一个坐禅呐，或者说是它是一个运动啊，他们中间就是说这个静的和动的相互结合，对身体的一种好，对身体的一种帮助，也可能。但是呢，少林武术呢，并不是说是都在少林寺里面，它是包括洛阳、登封、郑州附近这个几个省市，它有很深的这个民间的基础。比如说这个武术可能传到安徽，也会传到周口，也会传到这个洛阳，也会传到登封，他们相互之间的相互依存，只是说以这个少林寺而显。可能某一个家的一个人，他会传了2代3代，但到第4代他没有了。但少林寺是代代，它是子孙庙，这一代和尚有，下一代出家人师傅还有，再一代还有，他们在中间是没有就是完全切断，即使有了，民间有的再会返回来，再会把它补上，或者是民间没有了，他会把民间的补上，形成了一个相互的包容，相互的共同的生长。
那可以说它就是一个交流武术的中心。
交流武术的中心，对，
就是有人进来，有人出去，
对，
然后一直在交流。
对，是的。少林拳呢，它这里面就是说有功法、有拳法、有器械对练，到最后有心法，这各方面都是有一个完整的体系。可以说少林武术是一个丰富又完整，又非常规矩，非常成体系的一个武术流派。因为老的武术可能不是练3天5天，可能会练一辈子。新的武术可能练3天5天，练1年2年，好看漂亮或者怎么样，对吧？老的武术必须要投入这个感情和精力，甚至一生的时间。多方面原因，现在老武术不光是少林的，很多老武术现在基本上都面临一个共同问题：传承。
There are hundreds of different forms practiced in the Dongfeng region, and just as many weapons. Contrary to popular belief, Shaolin Kung Fu has little to do with the imitation of animals, or with acrobatics. Instead, the major Kung Fu styles practiced here can be considered as branches of Changquan, or long fist. There is Tongbei Quan, which means through the back boxing, and is focused on connecting the arms through rounding the back to generate power. There is Pao Quan, which means cannon fist, and uses combinations of chopping motions with explosive straight punches into the body, like cannons. There is Hongchan, which is said to be descended from the soldiers who served under Ming Hongwu, the emperor who founded the Ming dynasty in the 14th century. Hongquan is divided into Da Hongquan, or Big Hong Fist, which uses large expansive movements with aggressive footwork that covers a large distance. Xiao Hongquan, or Small Hong Fist, uses the expansion and contraction of the body to generate bursts of power. Another characteristic style is Luohanquan, which contains exotic-looking postures that imitate the 18 Luohan, who are archetypal figures in Chinese Buddhism that represent cultivation through perseverance and endurance. We began the trip with a visit to the Shaolin Temple itself, as Thomas had arranged us a personal tour with a young monk by the name of Shi Yentui. Yentui didn't practice martial arts. That was generally done by the Wuseng, or warrior monks, who only take partial vows. Yentui was a fully ordained monk, meaning he spends most of the day out of sight of the tourists, reciting sutras and practicing meditation. He told us that he had practiced martial arts when he was younger though, and that it was this that led him to Buddhism and to follow the life of being a monk.
那么少林寺呢有也是的千年古刹。那么少林寺呢是建于北魏太和19年，公元呢495年，是北魏孝文帝为了安置印度高僧拔土而建。那么少林寺呢是建立在少室山与太史山的密林深处，因而得名叫少林寺。那么少林寺这3个字呢是康熙皇帝所写，因为康熙皇帝呢很少留下字迹。 他只有在少林寺留下了3个字，那么就是少林寺的3个字。
The history he gave us was pretty much the textbook version of Bodhidharma, a holy man from India, coming to Shaolin to preach a new form of Buddhism, one that would become known as Chan in Chinese or Zen in Japanese. Key to this folklore is the idea that Bodhidharma, or Damwo in Chinese, taught the monks special breathing exercises, as well as giving them some manuals, including the I Jing Jing, or Tendon Changing Classic. However, scholars involved in the research of martial arts history have concluded that this manual dates to no earlier than 1624 and was actually composed by a Taoist priest by the name of Zining Daoren. The attribution of martial arts to Bodhidharma seems to have begun around the 18th to 19th century, and so seems unlikely to have much truth behind it, although it is an important part of the folklore. The famous story of the 13 monks who aided Emperor Tang Taizong, aka Li Shimin, in the 9th century in suppressing a rebellion in nearby Luoyang is a famous story that is often told. What is interesting to note, however, is that at this time there was no mention of these monks practicing any form of martial arts. In fact, it's not until the Ming dynasty in the 14th century that martial arts are even mentioned in any records of Shaolin, and this was mostly references to weapons, particularly the staff. During this period, many warrior monks were recorded as having been recruited into various militias to defend the coastline and border regions from incursions, which on a side note has been suggested as a possible explanation for the myth of the southern Shaolin Temple in Fujian. The main body of literature suggests that empty-hand styles of martial arts began to flourish here during the Qing dynasty in the 17th century. Earlier, Master Hu had explained to us how Shaolin Temple wasn't responsible for creating any martial arts per se, but was just a hub where knowledge was exchanged. The temple was always an important religious site in China, with strong connections to the imperial government, and controlled large swaths of land. This allowed it to accumulate huge amounts of wealth, but it also meant that it was the target of resentment, and it was ransacked and burnt down several times in history. We felt extremely privileged to have full access to the temple, to be taken to parts tourists couldn't visit. We were allowed into the halls to get up close to view the surviving murals, which are hundreds of years old and survived the burning of the temple in 1928. Regarding this most recent burning, local people told us that afterwards, several monks remained in the dilapidated temple, living under impoverished conditions, all the way up until the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s. We'd heard that one of these monks was still alive. He was almost 90 years old and had been teaching martial arts until recently. His name was Mao Yonghan, and we arranged to meet him. When we arrived, we were greeted by his son, who led us into an old apartment building. We sat down for some tea. His son told us that Mao's parents sold him to the Shaolin monks when he was 6 years old in exchange for some corn, and then left to be wandering beggars. Mao grew up under the care of the monks, who taught him about martial arts and Buddhism. And when he was 18, he left the monastic lifestyle to get married and raise a family. The entire meeting, however, was strained and uncomfortable, and it felt like all we were allowed to do was take some photos with him in front of a shrine. We left feeling confused and suspicious. Despite the huge number of forms practiced in Shaolin Kung Fu, the principles of the system are actually quite straightforward and logical, and are incredibly similar to the principles of other systems of northern Chinese martial arts. We were invited to the home of Wang Zhongren, who had agreed to explain them to us. We're in an outskirt of Dengfeng called Shaolin Block, Shaolin Xiaoqu, and we're going to meet a Shaolin master called Wang Zhongren. He's going to tell us a little bit about Qi Xing Quan and about his style of Shaolin, which they call Dongfeng Boxing, kind of like a slang term for it. Dongfeng Boxing basically means the style of Shaolin which is passed down among the people. It's like a folk style as opposed to the temple style. So he's going to tell us a little bit about that.
像小红拳吧，这个往上来，就是对方打我的头，我才这样上去的，对方要不打我的头，我就不这样去做了，他滚着出去了，滚着回来了。第一个呢，他是滚着的时候，像他转一样，可以把它木料转个洞，木是转个洞，但是他这个力量呢。 他就是你来打我，他这个力量，一转，一转，你来打我的时候，把力量开化掉，他把力量开化掉，但他这个开化的这是，在我们这里讲这个，一个是拳打四操，拳打四操呢，就是讲到那个少林拳它的特点来的，滚出滚入，一个屈而不屈。 直而不直，他在那个四操的时候啊，就讲究这个发为斜梢，头发，发为斜梢，发为斜梢叫怒发冲冠。少林拳的风格就是打人的时候要怒，怒到什么程度呢？帽子都能冲掉。
明白。
帽子都冲掉。一个是这舌为如梢，就是肉，肉就是肉类最简单，舌如垂刺，横起来了，横起来了，把那个舌头的力量把那个牙能吹出去，舌为如梢，舌为如梢。这个手上呢，他这个手上讲这个字如钢钉，字如钢钉。练习的时候，你心里要这样想心里这样想你这心这就是理与义合，与义离合，这就这个结合住了。你的心到，你的力量才到；你的心不到，你力量都不到。这个六合呢，我理解的是这样，跟其他那个有些老拳师的理解的不大一样这个从外形上看呢，六合手与足合，手与足合，这个肘与膝相合，这个肩与胯相合在这从外边看到合但是从里边的合，心与意合，心想到哪里，注意达到哪里这个心与理合 心向哪力量到哪里。另外心与这个静与离，心与静与离合心向哪里，静要用到哪里，这是离三合这外三合周齐收足，这是按定力打拳是这样去做。
Having learnt some Xini Liu He Quan in Shanghai previously, I was struck by how similar these principles were. This is something I would find out more about later. One teacher I'd been particularly looking forward to meeting was Cui Zhongwu, son of the late Cui Xiqi. Cui Xiqi was one of the 10 great masters of Shaolin, a group of teachers responsible for returning martial arts to the temple when it was rebuilt in the 1980s. He taught the branch of Shaolin known as Western Courtyard. Shaolin Kung Fu is traditionally divided into 4 courtyards, one for each point of the compass. Today, only the Western and Southern Courtyard styles survive. The Western Courtyard style focuses more on an external to internal approach, meaning that the movements practiced in the form should look as close as possible to how you fight. Cui Zhongwu's village was just beside the main entrance to the Shaolin Temple tourist area. In fact, it's hidden right behind the gas station where the tourist buses park. Master Cui was initially very hesitant about letting us film. He was a very conservative and old-fashioned teacher. Finally, he warmed up to the idea and took us to an open space behind his home, gave us an eclectic talk on some aspects of his system. This eclectic way of teaching is a very old and traditional way, and one that I had experienced many times in different parts of China. If you expect to be given all the answers in a systematic way in just a short period of time, you'll be very disappointed. Martial arts must be grasped, piece by piece, over a long period of time, and you need to join the dots and make the connections for yourself. This method of passing on information, while seeming strange to a Western mindset, actually gives you a more organic and holistic understanding, as opposed to a mere intellectual one.
没有这样。哦，这里都受不了是吧？更受不了。哦的。啊，你这里就不跑海了，是吧？明白。对。要盘住。盘是软的意思，就软的。啊。明白。在这里缠住是没有发力，到这里更发力。练功必须得有手把。我今天讲的是。 必须得有手把，没有把就不成功。你跟着老师才能学得有把，就是不让你看。你以为他练的是啥？那最好的功夫，是不是？人家练的是最高境界的。你看见他这不是？你刚才看到的动作，他这一缠开，他这一压开，这个动作还没有达到。 他们打这样，然后再打人，这里就咔嚓了。你看，少节、中节、顶节，完了，就这么简单。
不是全线吗？
啊，你别慌嘛，这小三节啊，中三节呢，少节、中节、跟节，又完了，又完了，对，上下来，上下你看。中这不是少节、 走节，跟节，右腕，就这么简单。讲到这个三节，就像这棵大树一样，这个大树你要想把它杀掉，只有那树身，它能砸伤人。如果是真正树梢能伤到人，那只是寥寥的轻伤，对不对？真正还是说那树身。说是少林腿就是少林腿功，就要求少林腿功是根基。这三节功都是南拳北腿嘛，叫个少林拳，腿功就是根结的意思。如果你要是对这有研究的话，你时间长就明白什么叫根结，什么叫中结，什么叫三节。但是这里面用途很多了，那前面啊，拿着，我人就倒了。你看我听见，都是这样的，看见没有？我下，你挂倒了。
One of the oldest and most senior masters of Shaolin Kung Fu is Xu Wudao, who lives in a village deep in the mountains nearby the town of Yanshi, a few hours by car from Dongfeng. Master Xu is the only teacher of Hujeongshung still alive, and he practices the southern courtyard style. In contrast to the western courtyard, the southern courtyard uses softer, more flowing movements and more complex spirals. Unfortunately, Master Xu is approaching 90 years old and is no longer able to practice or teach, so we just went to pay our respects and talk with him and some other villagers.
这师傅叫什么名字？
吴树和，
卢山。
啊，上次研学那来我才18岁，你说吧。
哪一年？
那我记还会记来。哦，关东拳、阮氏拳，我这说的拳是少林寺南院的。
少林寺南院。
吴和，他只会画。少林寺南院、北院的都是他票画的。
南院、西院或者西上院，西上院就是现在说的称为北院，就是为西上院。
北院，那是他代表的人才。
啊？
那这传承代表是啥？
那个啥？
西山北院的。
那你现在？他主要是这咱谁吧？主要是这咱玩是西院啊、永信等着起来嘞。实际是南院一直没有当过起来，他不当起来，但是人家功夫好。
南院是功夫。
哎，南院主要是功夫好。
武功好。
那咱玩南院主要就是那。
The man who drove us there is no stranger to Shaolin Kung Fu either. He's a doctor of Chinese medicine by the name of Yang Wenchao. His father, Yang Guiwu, was actually Master Hu's main teacher and another of the 10 great masters of Shaolin. Dr. Yang took us to his clinic to tell us a bit about the tradition of Shaolin medicine. And it turns out he also knew some of his father's Kung Fu, which he was keen to show us.
走，比如说你走个气吧，你想自然走个气，你这个心到，他说意念到啊，他自然都走了。你就是你意念，你都他自然都到。
好，明白。就是，如果我用心，就是我想到，这个意自然会。
你要当人，你最起码你用心去当。你自己好比说，我都不想去当人，你这功夫你能练成啊？练的时候，你没练拳练动作的时候，你就感觉到 这前面有人和人在对道，真正用的时候，哎，没人，还是像练拳一样，哎，这是叫意念。
明白。
这是你这手脚身法，它必须都得配合住。你配合不住，他我是这样推你了，你会到我不会，但是我要推到的时候，
对，
他这样同时要到。其实这手法我要进，同时我要看，这一下你还想再变，我这时候就有上来。这个叫盖上。
对，这是在先后前面的。
哎，这个盖上。好比说这个我不这么不那么多了，我双手也可以上。
明白。这个可能是。
Master Hu has dedicated his life to preserving the knowledge of all of these old masters and passing it on to those interested. Having spent the last few days visiting various masters, I was keen to spend some more time with Master Hu and find out what he had learned from these people. He kindly offered to teach me some of the core ideas of Shaolin Kung Fu, as well as some exercises from Xiniba that would help me improve my own training.
走圆就是你不管是从哪边走，圆上阴过来之后就要这么讲，就是你走的时候，感觉就是我在练武术的时候，我不要去走手，不要去走脚，你再往前走就随便走，一定不走的，一定感觉你要走的话，一定是后手，是后面，一定是后面这个发这个脊髓这个力量，发这里到这里，这个我们说的龙骨的，发这个力量当中才行，对，发后面的力量。发后面的力量，比如看，你是不是就像你比如说，你可能比如说害怕，举个例子，用这里摸，不是后背的力量，因为这都是小打小闹。你用后背整体的力量，你肯定是尽全身的力量去做一件事情。这样的话就是说，对吧？你看这个不一样，对不对？你用全身的力量做一件事情。
I wanted to know more about this Xiniba. It seemed to be something all the old masters avoided talking about. I knew that it was related to Xini Liuhe, and by extension the popular art of Xing Yichuan. But beyond that, I was just curious what this system was made up of.
那新一把是怎么来到少林这里呢？因为大家可能就是知道的有回民的新六合或者新一拳，可能大家可能知道的比较多，但是少林也是有新一把，可能很多人还是不太了解。
我所了解到的新一把是这样的，首先它有一个历史渊源。新一把从什么来呢？我认为简单的说，它是有这个长枪，由枪演变而来的。枪呢，就比如说我们的枪里面就是拦拿扎，对吧？拦拿扎。但是我们的新一把里面有基本上动作是很相近的，包括步伐，包括这个很多方面相近的。我相信新一把是从枪演变而来。演变就是据我们这现在能看得到的这个拳谱，或者是秘籍记载，我们能看得到的是明末清初，有一个山西的龙凤县的一个基农先生，也就是这个上面所讲的山西龙凤县基农先生，他是一开始练大枪的，最后他觉得这个大枪在一个就行走带走不方便，怎么把枪法扔掉，变为拳法，化枪为拳，这是一个比较客观的，这是有这个记载的。然后变过这个东西呢，在洛阳就传到这个人就是那个传到那个郑武奎，这个人是河南等门的郑武奎，乾隆年间，往上面走，从底下往上面转，而且打是中线，从这个膝盖、打部、站准、后接这里，包括这个天灵盖儿。全部打这个中线，包括他这是起打，落的时候这个是拍，走下，反正都是这样，都是用的是打中线，也有可能甚至于再甚至于扭从旁边，咣就是一巴掌，也有可能我不想从这边，我从这边上去了，也有可能我是直接我就不管，咣这个上去了，就这样上，他就不给你，就是说他不会说给你画圈啊、绕弯啊，因为他起动的话，他是落的时候就直接上。直接下深了，直接深中还下，深中还下不起来。但是他走的时候，你看手很宽，中间这个小慢绳变窄，小慢绳训练变窄了，他走明白训练绳。
什么是信一把？这信一把是什么意思？
信一把呢，就是如果按照我们我个人理解哈，是这样的，用心意，用我们的思想意识，去把持我们的作为或者我们的武术，就是用思想和我们的形体控制在一起，掌握我们的武术的一种方法。
那在我们在打的时候怎么体现呢？
还是用心意控制身体，就形神一体，就是我们想的和我们的动作达到完全的吻合，完全的心意一体。就是我想干嘛，我就自然就干嘛。我们说的自然，在武术中间体现的就是六合，六合就随心随意，内外合一。我们的身体，和我们的思想意识，比如说我们我们感觉有危险，我们有危险时，我们身体要有变动，就是身体和我们的思想和我们的反应是完全结合在一起，这就六合，就是身体和精神，或者是心意的东西。心意就是想法。我认为武术到最后修啊，最重要的是一个心得。可能我们刚开始练了很多东西，我们背了有500斤的东西。当我们练过以后，我们就会把一样的东西都扔掉。扔掉之后就发现我找到了我自己。可能这个自己就是我们自己的武术。
啊，明白。
不是越练越重，是越练越轻。
One thing I couldn't help thinking while Master Hu explained the meaning of Xiniba is that the very name belies a philosophy. This idea of pure mindfulness, to be absolutely focused on and immersed in the movement you're doing, to harmonize the mind and body in your action. Is this then not meditation? I feel that this journey has taken me full circle, right back to this perception of Shaolin Kung Fu as pursuing some kind of attainment. Except this isn't some mystic mumbo-jumbo, it's incredibly simple. It's as simple as stripping down your practice to the bare essentials, and practicing those essentials until your mind and body are in total harmony. A practice that, if applied to all aspects of your life, can perhaps lead to greater fulfillment overall. And what of the influence of Shaolin Kung Fu on Chinese martial arts as a whole? Well, my time here has made me realise that question is not a simple one to answer. As the Shaolin Temple itself wasn't the creator of Kung Fu, only a hub where local styles were practiced and exchanged, perhaps that question needs rephrasing. As we've seen, the various styles practiced in and around Shaolin are a mishmash of old long fist styles, held together by a set of principles that act as a glue. These principles, indeed, can be found in many other styles in China. And if I want to answer this question properly, I must widen my search and explore the martial arts of other regions of China. Another popular style, Xinichuan, shares many of these principles, and even a common ancestor with Xiniba. It would be a logical follow-up then for my next journey to explore the art of Xinichuan.